Alright, so for the Unit 8 review, I'm on the first page, number 3, E. Alright, these are geometric mean. And geometric mean, mean means that you're going to take the square root of the product of two numbers. So I'm just going to call them A and B. So geometric mean is the square root of the product of two numbers. And we can see here that we want to take the geometric mean of this. So we're looking at this altitude, is what this is called, the perpendicular height of the large triangle, is 18. And that's going to be on the outside. So that's going to be 18 equals. So if your value is either this line or one of the legs of the large triangle, that value goes on the left. Equals the square root of the product of two numbers. And the way that I showed y'all to do this is going to be the product of the two pieces that is touching. So this one is touching the x, the side x, and the side 28. So it's going to be x and a 28. So 18 equals the square root of x times 28. Alright, so I need to solve. This one involves solving. I'm going to need to solve for x. So to get rid of a square root, or a radical, you're going to square it. That's the inverse operation of square root, is to square it. So if I square a square root, they cancel each other out. And if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other side as well. So I'm going to have 18 squared is 324. So now I have 324 equals x times 28, because I canceled out the radical. So then the next step would be to divide. I'm trying to get x by itself, so I divide by 28. So 324 divided by 28. It doesn't divide evenly. It gives me a decimal, which would be 11.57, but I bet this did not say to give decimals, did it? Let's see the instructions.
The nearest tenth.
Oh, and is right. Alright, so rounded to the nearest tenth. So 11.57, so x equals 11.6. And it also could be in fraction form, which would be 81 over 7. So that would be either one of those. And then you wanted C?
Yes.
Okay. So another geometric mean, C, on the next page. It's also labeled number 3, but this one's C. That's a 45, 45, 90 triangle. And I want my answer as a simplified radical. Okay, so the way I showed you to do these is set up a tic-tac-toe grid for 45, 45, 90. And that is A square root 2. And then find something in your triangle to start with, 16. 16 is across from 90 degrees. So in my table, I go to 90 degrees, and across from 90 degrees, I put 16. All right, so that tells me that A square root 2 equals 16. To find out x and y, I know they're going to be the same, because for a 45, 45, 90, the two legs of the triangle are the same length, because two angles the same means two sides are the same. So I divide by the square root of 2. So a equals 16 over the square root of 2. And that's true. And if you wanted a decimal, that would be fine, because you could just type that in the calculator. But you're not allowed to leave a radical in the denominator. You have to move it to the numerator by something called rationalizing the denominator. And I just showed you to follow the pattern on this. The problem is that the square root 2 is in the denominator. So I said just move it to the numerator. You can't just move it to the numerator, right? You would have to do, let's go to the next slide. So that would be, there's already a 16 in the numerator, and I said to move it, so 16 square root 2. But you have to have something in the denominator. It was square root 2, so I'm going to do a 2 without a square root. Just 2. And then simplify if you can simplify. So this one is 16 in the numerator, 2 in the denominator. That simplifies to be 8. So a equals 8 square root 2, which is the length of both sides. Or a. Are there any other specific problems anyone would like to see worked? Number 4?
Yeah, like the one right under it. Just go.
This one?
Yeah.
Find each trigonometric ratio. Give your answer as a fraction in simplest form. Okay, so we will need SOHCAHTOA for this, so I'm going to go ahead and write over to the side. And SOHCAHTOA, if you write it vertically, shows you exactly where to put each piece. So for the first one, it's sine of q. Anytime you have a trig function, it's of a degree, of an angle. So this is sine of q, so it's sine of angle q. So I'm looking here at angle q. And if I'm doing sine, that's the s, because the three functions are s, c, or t. So sine is the s, and it's SOH. So O is on top of H. So when I write my fraction, it's going to be O on top of H. That's the parts of the triangle. So I do need a label. I go to my angle, angle Q. Label the triangle. Whatever is across from the angle is the opposite side. It's opposite the angle. Go to 90 degrees. Across from 90 degrees is the H. That's the hypotenuse. The leftover one is A. So 16 is A. This says the sine of Q. It's going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse because O is on top of H. So the value of O is 30. And the value of H is nothing. Okay, I guess I need to solve it first, don't I? Because I don't have a value there. Okay, so I could use Pythagorean theorem to figure out what H is. So first, I'm going to say 16 squared plus 30 squared equals H squared, because I know it's a right triangle. 16 squared plus 30 squared is 1,156 equals H squared. So if I want to find out what H is, remember the inverse operation of squared is to take the square root. So to cancel out the squared, I take the square root. Do that to both sides. It's 34. So 34 equals H. that is this 34. All right, now that I know that h is 34, I could put in 34. And 30 over 34. Those are even numbers, so I can at least reduce this by dividing by 2. 30 divided by 2 is 15. 34 divided by 2 is 17. 17 is prime, so I cannot reduce that any further. So the sine of angle Q is 15 over 17. All right, so then the cosine of angle Q. Well, if I look at the C for cosine, cosine is A on top of H. And A, I have A is 16. And I said that H was 34. So it's 16 over 34. Again, if I divide those both by 2, I end up with 8 over 17. All right, the next one is the tangent of angle Q. So I'm still on the same angle, so the way that I have the triangle set up is fine. I don't have to redo this as long as I'm using angle Q because it's set up for the angle. These are all angle Q, the first column. So the tangent of Q TOA, O is on top of A. O is 30. A is 16. So 15 over 8. So the tangent of angle Q is 15 over 8. The next column is sine of angle R. All right, now if it says angle R, I have to change all my letters and the arrows. The 34 can stay there. I know that side length is 34. But now I'm looking at angle R. So I'm labeling the triangle with that perspective. So from angle R, across from angle R is 16. So that's the opposite. It's opposite of the angle I'm talking about. 90 degrees across from 90 is H. The hypotenuse is always hypotenuse. The leftover is angle A. So no matter, every time I do trig, I always label my triangle in that order. I do the opposite because opposite from the angle is pretty easy to find. You put your pen on the angle, go straight across, that's opposite. Hypotenuse is pretty easy to find because it's always across from 90. Then you have one left over, so that's the adjacent. It's adjacent to the angle. It's touching the angle. Once you have them all labeled, then see what function you're going to use. The sine of angle R. Again, sine is O on top of H. Opposite is now 16. H is 34. So now it's 16 over 34. Divide those both by 2, 8 over 17. The cosine is A on top of H. A is 30. H is 34. That is 15 over 17. And then the last one is the tangent. Opposite over adjacent. 16 over 30. So that's going to be 8 over 15. Setting up trigonometric ratios. All right, so next, number 5 is solving for a missing side using a trig ratio. So you have to set up the ratio in order to solve it. Solve for x. So here my angle is just 54 degrees. So I'm going to set up my triangle based on the angle. Across from the angle is the opposite side. The 90 across from 90 is the hypotenuse. The leftover is the adjacent. Then go through and mark off the one that you're not going to use. Clearly, I'm not going to use the h because there's nothing over there. I'm looking for x, and then I have the side of length of 9. So those are the two pieces I'm going to use. So after you set up the triangle, I recommend just setting up all 3 sides every time. Then cross off the one you're not going to use. And then I clearly see I'm using O and A. O and A, if I look at SOHCAHTOA, is TOA. That's the function that uses O and A. So T stands for tangent. So the tangent of the angle, 54 degrees, equals the ratio O on top of A. O is x, A is 9. So tangent of 54 degrees equals x over 9. We're almost ready for a calculator, but not quite yet. Before you put in the calculator, you need to solve for x. So I have x divided by 9. To get the 9 out of the denominator, I multiply. Which the short version of that is take whatever's in the denominator. If you have a number in the denominator, move it in front of your trig function. So this is going to be 9 tangent 54 equals x. And as long as your calculator is in degree mode, you just have to type that in. So 9 tangent 54 is 12 point, all right, so x equals 12.387. This says round to the nearest tenth. The tenth is one place after the decimal. So I'm rounding to this spot. The 8 tells the 3 to go up. So 12.4. All right, let's look at C. Same type problem. A trig problem. I started the same way. This angle is 46 degrees. That's the angle is always where you start. Set up the triangle. Across from the angle is the opposite side. 90 degrees. Across from 90 degrees is the hypotenuse. The leftover is the adjacent, A. Cross off the piece you're not going to use. A. So that leaves O and H. If I look at SOHCAHTOA, it's SOH. So I'm using sine. S is for sine. So the sine of the angle, 46 degrees, equals opposite over hypotenuse, O on top of H. O is 24. H is X. So this one looks different than the last one. The way, after you get it set up. In the last problem, I had a number in the denominator and X in the numerator. This one I have X in the denominator and a number in the numerator. So the short version of what you're going to do when X is in the denominator, it's going to trade places with the trig function. Now, you do that by multiplying both sides by X and then dividing both sides by the sine of 46 degrees. But in the end, what happens when X is in the bottom, they trade places. So X equals 24 divided by the sine of 46. So when you're solving, you're going to end up doing one of those things before you type it in the calculator. So 24 divided by sine 46 is 33.363. I'm rounding to the 10th. So what, right after the decimal, so X equals 33.4. All right, let's do H. This H is circled. Ooh, this one doesn't have, the X is the degree. If you're solving for a degree, that's inverse trig, which is actually, in my opinion, slightly easier than solving for a side because you don't have to rearrange anything. You set it up the same. The angle X, that's the angle we're talking about. Across from the angle is the opposite side. 90 degrees. Across from 90 degrees is the hypotenuse. The leftover is the adjacent. There is nothing over here with the O, so I'm not using the O. I'm using the A and the H. C-A-H. Ka. That's for cosine. But because I'm looking for an angle, I'm doing the inverse cosine. All right, so for the inverse, looking for an angle, I do the cosine, inverse cosine of the ratio equals the angle. Now put X equals X degrees. And cosine is A on top of H. A is 25. And H is 40. All that -1 means is that you're going to press the second key before you press cosine. So you type in second cosine 25 divided by 40. Which should give you, so X equals 51.317. And if we round to the 10th, the 1 tells the 3 to stay the same, so it's 51.3 degrees. Number 6, we have a word problem. You will have a few word problems on your test. You're always going to draw a picture in geometry to help you solve a problem if there is not a picture already given. You know it's going to be a right triangle because this whole unit is right triangles. Alright, so the town park does an outdoor movie night every Saturday during the summer on a large screen. Kate is sitting 36 feet from the base of the screen watching a movie with her family. If the angle of elevation from Kate's to the top of the screen is 24 degrees, how tall is the movie screen? Okay, I didn't go over what angle of elevation was, but you won't be required to know that for the test, so it's okay. That is the angle from your point of view. If you're looking up at something, that's an angle of elevation. If you're if you're high and you're looking down, like on top of a building, looking down, that would be an angle of depression. So since she is sitting on the ground, so Kate is sitting on the ground. So we'll just say she's right here. So there's an angle where she's looking up at the screen. So that's an angle of elevation is 24 degrees. Let's read through this again. Town Park does an outdoor movie night every Saturday during the summer on our screen. Kate is sitting 36 feet from the base of the screen. So it looks like this is going to be the screen. And she is 36 feet away from the base of the screen. So this is the bottom of the screen. If we know the angle is 24 degrees, how tall is the movie screen? So we want to know X on that side. How tall is the screen? So we have to set it up. We're going to use trig for this. From the angle across is the opposite side. From 90 going across is the hypotenuse. The leftover is the adjacent side. There's nothing over here by the hypotenuse, so I'm not using the hypotenuse. So the trig function without the hypotenuse is tangent. T-O-A. So katoa. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. O is on top of A. So the tangent of the angle, 24 degrees, equals the fraction, or the ratio, of opposite, that is x, over adjacent, that is 36. When there is a number in the denominator, you just take the number and move it in front of the trig function. So 36 tangent 24 equals x. So x is 16.028, and this says it does around to the nearest tenth, so again it's 16.0. So how tall is the movie screen? 16.0 feet tall. Alright, let's look at another word problem. While parasailing, Ryan spots a dolphin on the water below. If Ryan is 228 feet above the water and the angle of depression to the dolphin is 15 degrees, what is the horizontal distance between Ryan and the dolphin? Okay. So we have, if Ryan is parasailing, the water clearly has to be on the bottom, right? So this has to be the water. If it helps kind of draw it out, you can have like the water. And if he's parasailing, that means he's up in the air on his little parasol. That's a terrible looking parachute. So he's parasailing and he is 228 feet above the water. The angle of depression to the dolphins that he sees. So he sees a dolphin over here. Right. Something like that. Is 15 degrees. This is where the angle of elevation depression is a little bit tricky. It goes from his point of line of sight going down is the angle of depression, 15 degrees. But that's in the wrong triangle, right? Like that's not in our triangle. So the easiest way to do this would be to translate that 228 degrees over. Because it's the same vertical height above the dolphin as it is above the water, right? Because the dolphin's in the water. So that's the easiest way to set this one up. Is just kind of make a box. Because that 228 is the same on both sides. But the angle of depression is from the horizontal going down. So that's where he's looking. The hypotenuse is his line of sight. And then this is 90. So now I can set it up from the angle 15 degrees across is the opposite. From 90 across is the hypotenuse. And the leftover is the adjacent. What is the horizontal distance between Ryan and the dolphin? So horizontal, it would be the water, but it's also A. I didn't label that, that's X. That's what I'm looking for, is the horizontal distance, straight across. Okay, so I'm not going to use the H. I'm going to use O and A again. So this is tangent. because Toa. O and A is only together for tangent. So this is the tangent of the angle, 15 degrees, equals opposite over adjacent. Opposite is 228. Adjacent is x. And when x is in the denominator, it trades places with the trig. So x equals 28 divided by the tangent of 15. Which is 104.497. And we're rounding to the 10th. So this is 104.5 feet.
Hey, why did it become 28 all of a sudden?
I'm sorry?
Why did it become 28?
228. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Thank you. 228. Big difference. Tangent of 15. It's 850. 850.907. Rounding to that 9, the 0 says stay the same, so 850.9 feet. Huge difference.